Hi there. Today we're looking at Reinforcement Learning, Fast and Slow by Matthew Botvinnik, Sam Ritter, Jane X. Wang, Zeb Kurt Nielsen, Charles Spondel, and Demis Hassabis. These people are from Google DeepMind, and this is a review of kind of a development in reinforcement learning, especially as it pertains to kind of how humans learn or what we can understand from the RL world that translates over to human learning. All right, so basically their argument here is that the first wave of deep RL, as you see here, is powerful but slow. And they give examples of this. So in box 1 is this. So they believe there's an image missing here. This is backgammon, td-gammon. This is the famous DeepMind Atari playing bot, and this is kind of the 3D labyrinth playing bots. So there's been a number of advances in RL, and especially what they talk about is deep RL. So when we talk about reinforcement learning, the easiest case is where you have an agent, and an environment. All right, so the agent will observe some observation O from the environment, and then based on that, the agent will perform an action A. And then the environment will give back a reward and also a next observation. So this is O0, O1, right? And then this is A0, and then here you give A1, AI. So basically this goes back and forth and back and forth. The agent performs an action, the environment gives a reward and the next observation. So this could be, for example, here in the Atari world, the observation is the screen itself, right? And then the agent needs to perform an action, which is an input of the joystick or pressing some button. You can see the individual actions actually listed here. And then the reward will be given to the agent via a number, which I guess is the same number as up here. So the task is to maximize the reward simply by, so the difference is you're not doing this in a supervised manner. So you're not telling the agent what would be the correct action to do. You simply tell it that whether what it did was good or bad. It's by giving it a high or a low reward. Right, so that's reinforcement learning. So what is deep reinforcement learning? Deep reinforcement learning simply means the agent maps the observation to the action via a deep neural network. So deep neural network. That's deep reinforcement learning, where the mapping or some part of the agent consists of a deep neural network. And that's, you see, for example, here, there is a deep neural network mapping the observation to the action, as well as down here, but it's a bit more complicated. All right, so they argue that the first wave of this was powerful but slow, meaning kind of you need a lot of samples. And they give two sources of why it's slow, why you need a lot of samples. They say the two factors are incremental parameter adjustment and weak inductive bias. So incremental parameter adjustment means basically that you have to update or train your neural network in a very small incremental way in order to basically, because you train it one by one, right? You train your neural network step by step. You have to make small steps in order to not forget what came before, right? You can't fundamentally readjust your neural network to every new batch of observations, because then that's going to destroy all the information you've learned of the old one. And then weak inductive bias here is basically an understanding of these neural networks. They are general function approximators, and they can approximate any function. So if you just think in terms of kind of, I don't know, let's say polynomials, and what kind of polynomials are there? This polynomial, this polynomial, this polynomial, this weird polynomial. If I have a function that can approximate all of these, then I have a weak inductive bias. Whereas if I kind of know, okay, all my polynomials are the polynomial that I'm looking for, ultimately, I'm very sure it's a third degree polynomial, right? So something like this, or like this, or like this. So this is much less of a class of functions that I can fit. But if I'm sure that the function that I'm trying to fit falls in this category, then I'm much faster. So this is then called a strong inductive bias, is where I build into the model. Basically, I tell it beforehand, here is a very restricted class of functions that you can fit. Whereas in a weak inductive bias, I won't tell it that. I'll simply say, well, model, you could fit any function you want, and I'm just giving you training samples. So this is a classic example of a bias variance trade-off, where there's a lot of variance in these models, meaning you can fit also a lot of functions. But here, because you bias the model towards a certain set of functions, it can lower this variance. And in this case here, they argue it speeds up learning. Because you don't have as much variance, that means you can basically go faster while learning. All right, so they propose two solutions to this problem of this kind of to mitigate these problems that make reinforcement learning faster, or have made reinforcement learning faster. This is a review, remember. So the first one is episodic deep reinforcement learning. And this episodic deep reinforcement learning, they specified here, fast learning through episodic memory. So what the suggestion in this field of research is to augment the neural network or the agent by a memory. And the memory could look something like this. So in a lot of these RL frameworks, what a principal component of the agent is, so the agent will get an observation O, and one of the things it has to do is estimate the value of this observation, of this state. So basically, the agent is in some state. Let's say you play Pong, right, and you are here down, and the ball comes your way up there, right? There's a little arrow, sorry. So the ball flies away from you, and you're all the way down, which basically means, I'm going to draw this bigger. So here, you are down here, and the ball is here flying up there. So one task in these agents that occurs often is to estimate the value of this observation. Basically means how much reward am I expecting from this state going into the future. In this case, I probably will not expect a lot of reward since I can't move up fast enough, right, to catch the ball. So this, I would assign this state a pretty low value. Whereas if I were up here, I would assign this state quite a high value. So as we've already seen, this is a deep neural network mapping. We learn to assign value to different states, and this is one of the parts that takes a long time. And these methods, the one that's depicted here, replaces this value estimation by saying, okay, we have an observation and we somehow need to estimate its value. Why don't we look for similar observation? So we have some kind of memory, right? And we go with our observation and we retrieve O'1, O'2, O'3 that are somehow similar, right? So in our Pong example, I'm up here, ball moves here. I could be looking now at states where I was here or where I was here, like really close, or where the ball flew a bit differently but still in the same direction, or down here, right? So all these states are kind of close to my state, and I already have played these since they're in my memory, right? So with every one of them, I can also retrieve the reward that I got. So because I already know. The problem in reinforcement learning is before you do an action, you don't know what the reward will be. But here, I already know because I've played it. I've already experienced it. It's in the past, so I know what reward I got. Right? So, and this is exactly what they say over here. They basically say, here we have time. Time runs this way. We're in state 1, then in state 2, and so on. And we perform actions and get rewards. And what we can do is we can save these states into this memory along with their sum of discounted rewards that we collect from that state on. And then later, this is like a SpongeBob reference, if we want to estimate the value of some new state, right, what we do is we retrieve all of these states from memory, calculate a similarity score over them, and we weight, basically we add their rewards weighted by how similar they are to the state that we want to compute. So this basically amounts to averaging over states respective by how close they are to the current state, right? This is kind of a soft way of saying I only select the states which are close. And that gives you a value estimate for the new states. So basically, this means you just got rid of having to train a value function. And this will speed up your reinforcement learning quite a bit. If you don't have to train that, if you already have good value estimations from your previous experience, that's great. Of course, there are a number of problems associated with that. Namely, if this memory here, for example, becomes stale, it doesn't represent the future rewards quite as well. There is also a question of which states do you keep in memory, just the good ones, or do they have to have a certain property? Do you have to have some diversity in there? And of course, the biggest problem here, is how do you know when two states are similar or when they aren't? It might be easy in a situation like Pong, where I only have like 3 variables, like position, y position of my paddle, and position of the ball, and velocity of the ball. Those are like, I can specify those in 5 numbers. But if it gets harder than that, if it's like this labyrinth setting, full 3D environment, then we have no clue which states are similar to each other. And what most end up doing is they will train, you guessed it, they will train a deep neural network to give you this similarity score between states. Right? How they do it is a different question, but presumably you can train this network offline, basically meaning you can pre-train it. You could pre-train it, and then so we have 2 stages. Stage 1, pre-train, train similarity, DNN. Right? There's an M. And then once we've done that, second stage, do reinforcement learning using this. And the claim here is that by having done this second stage will become faster. So it doesn't really solve the problem of the sample efficiency, but what it says is, okay, the actual reinforcement learning part will become faster because we've already done the work previously. But basically by including this similarity score, DNN. By including this in the language of the review here, we have successfully introduced an inductive bias into the RL procedure, because the RL procedure now can't just fit any function. We tell it, your value function is one that conforms to our notion of similarity that we've pre-trained. This restricts the RL algorithm, and we give it an inductive bias, and as long as our similarity score is useful for the RL algorithm, it can speed up its learning because it doesn't have to learn the value function itself. All right, cool. So the second part here is a bit more abstract. It's called meta reinforcement learning, speeding up deep RL by learning to learn. These kind of learning to learn approaches are quite abundant in the literature. People try this. Usually it's very large scale experiments. Basically you have, I believe they show it somewhere here. Yeah, you have like some outer loop where you would say that's this thing here. What the outer loop does is in each loop it samples one environment. So it samples one environment from a distribution of environments. So now you not only have one environment, but you say, okay, if I'm going to navigate this maze, trying to learn to navigate this maze, I'm going actually to learn to navigate many mazes, right? So it's not like you train one agent to learn, you train one agent to navigate many mazes. That would just be classic reinforcement learning. But you want to train an algorithm that helps an agent learn a particular maze. And you do that by training your helper algorithm on a variety of agent maze combinations. So in each step, you sample one environment, like this here, and you then have an inner loop here. You fully reinforcement learn train an agent in the classic sense on this environment, right? You see here action, observation, reward, right? But the agent receives some kind of signal from outside. So the outside algorithm will kind of tell the agent how to approach the problem, right? This could be that it initializes the weights. Here you see that the outer loop trains the parameter weights which determine the inner learner that interacts with an environment during the duration of the episode. For every cycle of the outer loop, a new environment is sampled from a distribution of environments which share some common structure. So basically, one would expect when you train this that these parameters here, this could be, for example, it could be the initial weights of the network that the agent uses. This is one possibility, right? This is very abstract here, this meta reinforcement learning. It could be literally anything that the outer model teaches the inner model or gives to the inner model, right? And you train both of these with reinforcement learning. So the inner you train with reinforcement learning on the individual rewards, and then you can train the outer loop on the reward that the entire agent environment episode achieved. So that's kind of a two-loop situation. And so that's meta reinforcement learning. Again, it's very unspecified what it does. But as you can already see, if you now have such an algorithm that kind of tells the inner agent, just as an example, how to initialize its weights, right? How to initialize the weights of its deep neural network. If you have that here, then the agent, you will technically bias it. This is again an inductive bias. So you will give it inductive bias towards what you think are good weights to generally learn these maze structured environments, right? Since the outer loop, you can update it way slower because it needs to learn over a longer time horizon and it needs to learn things for a different variety of environments. But once you have good kind of initial weights for a particular environment, then this agent in here can learn much faster given an individual environment. So the agent, you instantiate it and then you give it good starting weights or some other kind of signal about the environment, and then it can go much, much faster at learning the environment. Thereby you have just sped up this inner agent by providing it an inductive bias. And that's basically what the claim of the review is, that by providing these models with a larger inductive bias, you may then speed up their learning because you've kind of told them what good functions are from the outset. Of course, you see the problem again here. Well, the problem is, of course, you actually need to train this outer loop, and the outer loop may actually take much longer to train than a single unbiased reinforcement learning thing. But again, what you could do is you could pre-train on a distribution of environments, and then once a new environment shows up that is similar to this distribution, you can then have the agent instantiated and learn much faster. So again, kind of this two-step process. You could pre-train this outer loop, and then the inner loop will be much faster than if you didn't have the outer loop. All right, so those are basically the kind of outlines they do here. They then kind of do a connection to like the brain and so on. And they relate this to biology and biological learning. But ultimately, their conclusion is here that whenever you have slow RL, or this is at least my conclusion from their article, whenever you have slow RL, you can transform it to fast RL, but you have to outsource the slow RL, slow something else, slow X. You have to outsource the slowness to some other part. So if you want to do fast RL, you have to outsource the slowness, and what the slowness provides is an inductive bias. Which means, if you want to do like fast RL with episodic memory, you have to learn the similarity function, which might be slow in itself, but then the RL will be fast. And if you want to do this via kind of an outer meta learner, again, this learning of the outer meta learner might be slow, but then the inner learner will be fast. In a connection to the kind of biological aspect of this, they do make a connection which I find is appropriate, in that, for example, the human brain, the reason we can learn things fast, let's say in the physical world, picking things up, dropping things down, or navigating our paths, we're incredibly good at this, navigating through like a weird terrain with rocks in the way, is because, of course, our brains have been adapted to these kinds of environment over generations. So there is an outer process, like evolution, which is this kind of outer loop, and it instantiates the inner loop, which are the humans that kind of live or die by their ability to navigate better. So if the outer loop does a good job of only keeping the humans alive that can navigate well, then the individual human in here that does this, the individual human given a landscape with rocks, will then be much faster at learning to navigate it. All right, so that was it for that. It's an interesting article to read, especially the connections to the kind of biological aspects. And with that, have a nice day.